We are going to start a new Mishnah now on page Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, which is in the art scroll 81A1. Okay, so we're going to learn like this. The Mishnah says, Mishin is chayiv b'shtei misos. A person who, we have to see the Gemara and explain the scenario. A person who's been already obligated to be punished by the Beis Din through death, the death penalty, with two different types of death penalties. So the question is, which death penalty does he get? They're not all equal. There's the 4 death penalties of stoning, burning, beheading, and choking. And if he's obligated for 2 of them, which of the 2 would he get? So the Mishnah says, Mishin is chayav b'shtei misos, someone who is obligated with 2 death penalties from the Beis Din. So Beis Din nidem b'chamura. So the Beis Din goes and applies the more severe of the 2 death penalties. Now that's seems to be simple, and the Gemara will explain it. How about over Avera, a person? Hey Bruce, we're just starting the Mishnah, page 81A1, in the art scroll. So again, we're learning the Mishnah on top of the page. It says a person who is been found guilty and obligated to 2 death penalties. Two of the different death penalties between stoning, burning, beheading, and choking. So the Mishnah says, Nidam bechamura. He gets the more severe of the 2. Over Avera, how about if he does a transgression where that one single transgression includes with it 2 different punishments? We'll see in a second how is that possible. And he's obligated in 2 different types of death penalties. So then Nidim Bechamura, again, he gets the more severe one. This is the rabbis. On this, Rabbi Yossi argues, Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. Nidam Bezika Harishon Shaba'ilav. He gets the first, the Zika Rishon means he gets the first one that will apply to him. What would be the example? The example the Gemara is going to give, how could you have one transgression that has 2 death penalties, and which one applies first? Would be in the scenario of your mother-in-law who's married. So the Torah forbids a person to have relations with one's mother-in-law, and that's a death penalty we learned before of burning. If someone has relations with a married woman, she happens to be a mother-in-law, but she's married, so then she's a married woman. So that's that's the death penalty of choking, which is less severe. So here we would say, the rabbis would say, hey, Howard, the rabbis would say you get the more severe one, which is burning, the one which applies to your mother-in-law. However, Rabbi Yossi argues, Rabbi Yossi says, no, she was married before she was your mother-in-law, presumably, right? She was married, had a daughter, and then when you married her daughter, then it became an additional chiyuv, an additional obligation for you to avoid, so to say, which was now she's your mother-in-law. So if you were never to marry her daughter, she still would be forbidden to you as a married woman. So then Rabbi Yossi says we go with the married woman punishment, which is less severe, because that was always there, or there before the fact that she was your mother-in-law. That's what Rashi says. Over Aveiro sheyesh bo shtei misos. What would be one transgression that has 2 death penalties? Your mother-in-law who's married. Again, your mother-in-law doesn't have to be married. She could be divorced, she could be a widow, but in the case where she is married and you have a relation with her, you're transgressing two transgressions, one of a married woman, a second of your mother-in-law. Rabbi Yossi says that the married woman part came first. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. So the Gemara is going to analyze this Mishnah. The Gemara first says on the first part of the Mishnah, which says that a person who's been convicted of 2 death penalties, that person should receive the more severe one. The Gemara says Pshita. That seems to be obvious. Why would we assume to give the person the lesser of the 2? Like he says, should he rather profit? Should the person profit because he also happens to have a lesser death penalty? As far as we're concerned, there's one death penalty, which is the more severe one. That's the main one in focus. So Rava says, no, it's not so simple. We're not talking about a person who did two different acts that was with all the parts were in place, meaning there was witnesses and warning, came to Bezdin, and now we have to know what death penalty to give him because there's two cases against him or her. So the Gemara says no. Here's Rava says, Rava says, we're talking about a scenario. The person did the lesser of the two transgressions, which included in it the death penalty. And he was already, or she was already found guilty and sentenced. Not just sentence here. V'nigmar dina means sentence. Alavera kala, on the lesser of the two. And then he or she goes and does after the sentencing the more severe of the two. And now we have to try this person a second time. So which death penalty should we give them? So what's the thinking that the mission is coming to avoid? I would have thought, given the nigmar dina lavera kala, because at the time when the person transgressed and now is found guilty for the more severe act, that person, he or she, was already found guilty and convicted for the lesser of the two. So Sakadai Techamina, given the Nigmar Dino, because Heshek, we're in the Mishnah, Pei Aleph, Amid Aleph, the Mishnah is talking about a person who does, the first case is a person who does, is convicted for two death penalties. So he gets the more severe of the two. The second case is where a person does one action that includes in it two types of death penalties. For instance, a married woman who's your mother-in-law, which includes in it for the married woman part, choking, and for the mother-in-law part, burning. So the rabbis say then she gets the burning because that's the more severe. Rabbi Yossi disagrees in that case because Rabbi Yossi says in the event that she was married, when she became your mother-in-law, she was forbidden for you first. So we go with the zika, the one that you're forbidden with first, the connection first. And that is the married woman. So as far as you're concerned, nothing changed. She was always a married woman that's prohibited to you. And therefore, the punishment should be the choking versus the burning. Okay, so but now the Gemara is analyzing the first part of the Mishnah. So Pshita, first, again, the Gemara quickly. The Gemara says, obvious, if a person has two convictions, we go with the more severe. So you want to say the person should benefit because that person, he or she, also has a lesser of the two. Rava says, we're talking about the person does the less severe death punishment that comes with it, the death penalty, and has been convicted. And then overall and already he or she was convicted for the lesser of the two death penalties. And then after the conviction, this person goes and does a more severe transgression, and which concludes with it a more severe death penalty. I would have thought, given the nigmar dine, because the sentencing happened already, for the lesser of the two. So then it falls under the category similar to what we learned before, that Hai Gavra Katilahu, that person's a dead person. Person's a dead person. Why the person's a dead person? Because once the person's convicted, we learned. And this is what Tosfos talks about, and other commentaries talk about. It's not so simple even, because we learned that if a person's a treifa, a person who is going to die, surely going to die, then you can't you can't put him to death. Why can't you put that person, he or she, to death? Because the witnesses cannot be found to be lying. Because only if in the case that it's sure that you would kill someone, we learned this a few weeks ago. You can't have Eidi Zomimim, because you can't convict them because the Eidi Zomimim are coming to kill a dead person, but not a person that's going to live. So you wouldn't put the witnesses that are, if in the case the witnesses are lying, you wouldn't put them to death. So then you don't put the person to death. So that's so Tosfos has to say, Tosfos asked that question, and Tosfos says it's talking about in the case where we said in the Gemara, we learned a few weeks ago, that if they do it in front of the Bezdin because of the verse that says you got to eradicate the evil from within you. So the Bezdin who've seen themselves, they're not through witnesses, that a person committed, let's say, murder. So then you go and you put that person to death even though that in case if it was just relying on the witnesses, we wouldn't put that person to death because technically the witnesses can't be refuted because they're coming to say testimony about a dead person, meaning technically dead because he's about to die. So to here, the person who committed the lesser of the two and was convicted, the peasant is going to kill that person with the lesser of the two death penalties. Now that he does the more severe death penalty, so why is that? Why would we even judge that person? Because the witnesses are not kosher witnesses. So therefore, Tosfos says it's talking about, let's say you do the more severe, and let's say, okay, you do the more severe in front of the Bezdin themselves. So Sakatai Techamina, so that problem is gotten rid of, and therefore the Mishnah says, I would have thought, given the Nigma Dina Laveira Kala, Hai Gavra Katla, he's a dead person, or she's a dead person. Kamash Milan, therefore we come and we learn that no, that if even after the conviction, the person goes and transgresses a more severe transgression and is found guilty with a more severe death penalty, we go with the more severe death penalty. That's the Tosfos. Tosfos says, if you see the Tosfos for Nigmar Dina Laver Kala, Tosfos asks the question. He answers, Veishlomer, the Hacha B'maydi is talking about the Hacha Be'er Shnia, the second transgression of B'fnei Bezdin, he does before the Bezdin, or she does before the Bezdin. That Filu Be'edis, Shiata Yechel Azima, even if though you couldn't refute the witnesses because they're saying testimony about a person who is a dead person, because that person is already convicted for the death penalty. Like we said before, by a treifa, by a person who's surely going to die, based on the first we are tahara mikir becha. Okay. So now the Gemara asks a question. Back to the Gemara. The Gemara asks a question. If you look at Rashi, Rashi explains the Gemara's question, Pshita. The Gemara, Rashi says the Pshita, it's obvious that B'chamura Nidan, that we go for the more severe punishment. Bon is chayiv. Also on the more severe one, she's found guilty. The heichi salik adaitim. Why would you think lidem bekala to go with the lesser of the two? Do we go? Does the person benefit because that person, he or she, has a lesser of a death penalty already? Just because that person transgressed two transgressions, why would we even think to go with the lesser one? Had the person only done the severe one, that person, he or she, would get judged and convicted. Why would we go with the lesser one? So now the Gemara asks a question. Back to the Gemara. So we understand the first statement in the Mishnah. The first statement in the Mishnah is talking about even in the case where a person was convicted for the lesser of the two, and then goes and transgresses, let's say, according to Tosfos, in front of the Bezdin, the more severe. They judge him, try him, and or her, convict him of the more severe death penalty, then he gets the more severe, she gets the severe death penalty. So he says, the father of Avud Rabbi Yosef, the father of Yosef Bar Chama mi Rabba Bar Nasan. So he asks the question, Minahal Milsa. How do we know? How do we know that even though the Afagav, the Nigmar Dina Kala, that we go for the more severe one? Because now we're already going to a more interest. The law is getting more interesting. The person's been convicted for the more severe one. Forget the scenario. How was it possible for the person to have committed a second transgression after the conviction? But they managed to do it, whatever it was. Let's say they had an avodah zara on them, right? And they pulled it out and quickly tried to worship it, and which is skila, which is a more severe death penalty, right? So, but either way, however the scenario is, the father of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Chama, asks from Rabba Bar Nasan, the son of Nasan, Minaha Milsa. How do we know this? How do we know that once you're convicted, why don't we just keep with the conviction and maybe not even try the second trial? The Omer Rabbanan. So the rabbi said, Mishin is Chayiv Shtei Mises Bezdin, Nida B'chamura. How do we know that what the rabbis say, that if a person does two transgressions, we go with the more severe one? So he brings a proof from a verse in Yecheskel. The verse in Yecheskel says like this. The verse in Yecheskel says, this is a continuation of the pasuk. Those who have the pasuk is talking about Yecheskel 18, is talking about a person and a man and his son. So the man is a righteous person, and everything good the father does, the son does differently. So now we're quoting the second part of the verse, that the son spills blood. He's a violent son who sheds blood. Elaharim achal, he eats on the mountains, which these are all things about the righteous father we say he does not do, which we're going to get to that verse later. So he spills blood, he eats on the mountain. We'll see what that means. He defiled his friend's wife. El Galilim Nasai. He looks towards the idols. I mean, he worships idols. So the Gemara says, and how is the verse finished? The verse finishes, it goes like this. I'll just read the whole verse inside. It goes, V'hoilid ben paritz shreifech damim v'asa es me'achas me'ela v'hu es kol elu layasa ki gam elaharim achal es eishes reu timei ani ve'evin haina gezelis gezel chavali. This is a whole bunch of things that he does wrong. And then he answers, then he continues and he goes, B'neshech nasim v'tarbis, he gives all kind of bad things that he does. And he says, at the end he says, Kol te'evais eila, he does all these abominations. Mais yumas dam of bai, he gets put to death. Okay, so now the Gemara, it goes through the verse. These are all different death penalties, right? So how does he do all these things? And then it says mais yumas, he gets skila, he gets the more severe of the three. Mais yumas dam of bai, we learned before a few months ago. Whenever the verse in the Torah says dam of bai, his blood or her blood is on their head, meaning they're responsible for their blood, that is to say that they get stoning. So the verse says, what did he do that deserves death penalty? It says, he spilled blood, means he murdered someone. What punishment is that? B'sayev. That would be, he would be beheaded with a sword. As Eishes Reu Timoy, and he defiled his friend's wife, which is to have a relationship with a married woman. That is punishable by choking. There's a second type of death penalty. And then he worshipped idols. If he looked towards idols, meaning he worshipped idols. That is idol worship. And what is the punishment for idol worship? Skila, stoning. And the end of the verses, after we list other things that he's done wrong, it says that he gets put to death and his blood is on his head. And we learned before that verse is Yebeskila. That means he gets stoning. So what do we see from here? That first he killed someone, then he had a relationship, then he served idols. And nevertheless, he gets the more severe, he gets the skila. So from this verse that Yirmiyahu is referring to, doesn't mean Zechariah is referring to, it's not referring to a specific person, but even if he's referring to a concept, we see that he gets the more severe one, which is the skila. So he says, so Reb Nachman says, Maskal Reb Nachman Yitzchak. Reb Nachman Yitzchak asks, we're turning to the page 8182. So Reb Nachman Yitzchak asks that how do we know that this is referring to three different death penalties? You're assuming that spilling blood means murder. Maybe spilling blood is another kind of transgression. And he says, for instance, Maskal Reb Nachman Yitzchak, Ema Kula Beskila. Maybe the transgressions that he's done are all skila punishable transgressions, i.e., he doesn't explain. When Yecheskel says that he spilled blood, what does that mean? Doesn't mean he murdered someone. It says ben Sayru Myra. That's the son, that's the rebellious son that we learned about. And the rebellious son we're scared he's going to kill someone, and therefore he gets the beskila, the punishment is stoning. Eishes Reu Tima, there's a possibility that the woman that he defiles is not just a regular married woman, which is punishable by choking. Could be this is a Nairam Ursa, a engaged woman, and we know the law of an engaged woman is more severe than a married woman, which is Beskila. She gets punished, if she's willing, gets punished by.
Can you give it English for Naira? I can't pronounce it.
Sorry?
The word you said, Naira, was whatever.
Naira Musa means a young woman who's engaged.
Thank you.
And that death penalty, so if he defiles her, he gets the stoning. Vel gelulim nasein of zuvetz chavman, if he does idol worship, that is obviously stoning. So then then he gets, and then the pasuk continues of other transgressions that he does that are not punishable by death, and then he gets stoning. So there's no proof that he gets stoning, the more severe one, if he does a whole bunch and he does the lesser one first. Let's say he did and he was tried according to what Yecheskel says. That means, let's say he murdered first, and then he had relations with someone else's wife, and then he served idols. And if he's convicted for each one of them, one after the next, before he did the next one, so he should be punished. Possibly, it's the fact. So the Gemara wants to say that from there we see it. And the last one he did was idol worship, means to say that even though the last one was idol worship, he still gets stoned because we go to more severe one. So on that, Reb Nachman Yitzchak says, no, maybe all of them were transgressions connected to stoning. And therefore the final punishment is stoning. He was a rebellious son. He slept with a young woman who's engaged, which is punished by stoning, and he served idols, which is stoning. So therefore he gets stoning. But if he really did murder first and was convicted, or he slept with a married woman first who was not a young engaged woman, which is punished by choking, not stoning, maybe then he would get the first one, not the more severe one, which comes later. So the Gemara says, well, then if that's the case, what's Yecheskel teaching us? Seeming, if the way the Gemara initially understands the pasuk, Yecheskel is teaching us this law, that even though he murdered first and he was convicted for murder first, then he goes and sleeps with a married woman and is convicted for that, and then he goes and serves idols, which is the third, and that's the most severe, which is punished by stoning. He still gets stoning. But if you want to say that he committed 3 transgressions, that all of them are punished by stoning, what is Yecheskel teaching us? We know that already. That's the law. So Im Kain, if that's the case, so maybe the Gemara says, he's coming to warn them. He's telling them this is the law, like what a prophet does. What does a prophet do? A prophet's not only mechadish, doesn't come to teach us laws. A prophet comes to tell the people what they're doing wrong and not to do it. So even though that's the law, and he's not teaching anything new, but the people are not listening to the law. So he's warning the people to listen to the law, that if you're going to be a disobedient son, and you're going to be sleeping with young married engaged women, and you're going to serve idols, all 3 of them punishing by stoning, you will get stoned. He's not teaching us anything new in the law. He's warning the people not to transgress the law. So the Gemara says, Imke, if that's the case, so maybe he's coming to Chazer, the laws of the Torah, to teach us. Imke. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, his wording should have been similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like when Moshe Rabbeinu repeated the Torah in the Mishnah Torah, in Devarim. Many laws were said over again. Why? As a way of warning of the Jewish people. So then Yecheskel should have went and gone and used his own language. He should have used the language similar to what Moshe said. Okay. So therefore the Gemara finishes on that, and that's our proof. So the first part of the Mishnah, person transgresses and gets tried for 2 different violations, both of them punished by death. The first one is the less severe punishment. The second one is the more severe punishment, even though he or she was tried and convicted and sentenced to death on the lesser. If some way or another that person manages to transgress a more severe one, to be judged again and to be convicted and sentenced, we go with the more severe one. Now, again, there's a lot of questions in the halacha, a lot of talk in the commentaries, because we definitely have to try both cases. If someone's going to say, why did we try both cases? We just try, once you had the severe one, why would you try again a second case? Because what happens before the death penalty, some way or another, the witnesses are found to be lying in the first case, or some other kind of technical problem that the death sentence doesn't get fulfilled because of something else that was wrong even after the sentencing. We know that we've learned that even after sentencing, even after the person convicted and sentenced, if we could show any what way that the witnesses were lying, or some sort of scenario that would find the person to lift off, like an appeal, to lift off the death sentence, we would. So therefore, we have to try the second case, because it could be the first case is not going to come into being. And once you tried both cases, and both cases are solid, and then we go with the second, the more severe of the 2. So now the Gemara wants to go back to the Yecheskel verse. So again, Yecheskel starts off talking about the negative, That's the Gemara. That means the Gemara brings down first the negative part of Yechezkel. But prior to that, in chapter 18, verse 6, he says, I'm going to quote the pasuk, the righteous person doesn't eat on the mountains. He doesn't look towards the idols. He doesn't defile a married woman. He doesn't go to a woman in her time of her period. So here he says, Darish Rab Acha bar Chanina. That Rab Acha, the son of Chanina, learned like this. What does that mean in the first part of the verse? Elaharim loy achal. So he doesn't eat in the mountains. What does it mean he didn't eat in the mountains? What does that mean? What is that referring to? So the Gemara says, loy achal shaloi achal b'schus avoisav. He doesn't have to come on to the merits of his forefathers to eat. The haram in this case doesn't mean that he's physically standing on the mountain. The haram are referring to, we know that Avram Avinu is called a mountain, right? Nikr, we know that's brought down the famous Medrash, I think Rashi quotes it, that the fathers were called mountains. So what's the haram? He doesn't eat, or she doesn't eat on the mountains, that they don't have to, like Rashi says, that the reason why this person eats, he or she, is not because only because of being a descendant of Avram and Yaakov, but has their own merits because they're righteous people, they're chassid. What does it mean that this person doesn't look towards a idol? So it doesn't mean that the person doesn't just go look through the idol. It means a more refined character trait. The person doesn't stand in an egotistic way, straight backed. When a person stands straight backed, it's like, full of themselves. So the person has humility. That's idol worship is connected to ego, to self-promotion. You're looking after your best interest. So here the person doesn't have a koma skufa, doesn't stand straight backed. What's Eishes Re'eloi Timai? What does it mean not to defile your friend's wife? I mean, that's obviously we're not talking about something that's so basic. So it says Shlo Yarad Le'umnois Chaveiroi. He doesn't kind of try to take away the business or step in to be competition to the business of their friend. This is talking about a person that doesn't go and try to take away business from someone else. That's why, like Rashi says, I don't know if Rashi says it, I saw it somewhere else, that we know that there's a connection between when the Torah sometimes refers to both food and your wife in similar terms, like it says by Yosef, the bread that he eats, that the bread is referring to the wife, so to vice versa, the wife is the source of the blessing in the house. So when it says he doesn't defile his friend's wife, he does not step into his friend's trade. What does it mean? He doesn't go to kirav. He doesn't go to a woman in the time of her period. It doesn't mean we're talking about a righteous person. So we're not talking about, these seem like very basic things that person would avoid. So would avoid. So he says it means this is a person who never takes from charity. We're talking about a person who never takes from charity. It says, because he says at the end, the Rashi brings down why we have to say all these things. Rashi says, that he's a righteous person, he surely will live. Means Rashi says we're talking about an absolute righteous person. And we can't just say that person who doesn't eat on the mountains if that just means literally, or doesn't defile his friend's wife, or doesn't go to a woman in time of her period, that's a tzaddik. I mean, that's the law. So we're talking about someone who's doing it beyond the law. Because it could be he does other transgressions. It's obviously not it's not the simple. We're talking about a person who, one, doesn't need the schusim of the fathers to eat, doesn't mix into someone else's business, doesn't walk around egotistic with a straight back. And when it says Valisha need to like Kiriv, doesn't go to one time of her period, doesn't take money from the charity fund. And therefore the verse says, Tzaddik hu chai yichya. that person is surely going to be righteous and live. So here, Rabbi Gamliel, the famous sage and companion, and sometimes arguing partner with Rabbi Akiva, says like this. When Rabbi Gamliel, would reach this verse in Yecheskel, he would cry. What do we, he says, what do we see from here? That only a person who's so righteous that everything that person does is gonna have everlasting, is gonna live long. Meaning never has to come on to the charity, never has to never bother someone else's business, never walks around egotistic, never has to eat on the mountain on the chusim, on the merits of the forefathers. So he says, who's such a person? He would cry, because how could a person reach such a level of piousness that's so complete in everything that they do? So Amalei Rabbi Kiva says no, that you're being too hard on yourself. Why? If that's the case, when it says in the verses of Vayikra by Achrei Mois at the end, when they talk about all the forbidden relationships, so it says Al titamu b'chol leila. Don't impurify yourself with all these things. Hachinami b'kuli. You would think that if when the Torah says don't become impure with all these things, you would have to transgress every single forbidden relationship. So you would think also, but if you only do one, then you're not becoming impure. And that's obviously not the case. The Gemara, the pasuk means to say, don't do any of them, because any of them would make you impure. It just means any of them. A person that has any one of those merits. It means if a person is just a person that could eat on their own schusim, or just a person on their own merits, doesn't have to come onto the forefathers, or just a person who avoids ever taking from the public charity, or is a person who just, and even though they need it, obviously, we're not talking about a person who's rich, who doesn't need it to take from the public fund, because that person was never going to be given from the public fund. I'm talking about a person who needs, or doesn't take, or a person who's never going to, never in any situation. Again, we're not talking about a person who goes and steals someone else's business. But you don't do anything that could hurt someone else's business. That's hard. I was just talking to someone yesterday in a meeting, right? Anytime you make a sale, you take away business from someone else, right? Anytime you go and you say, I want to supply you with X, Y, and Z. If they never had that product, it's one thing. But if they had that product before, so you're taking away that business from someone else. So we're talking about someone who never goes and takes on anyone, tries to hurt anyone else's business in any way and form. We're talking about beyond the letter of the law. Or a person who never walks around egotistically with a straight back, always humble. That's not so easy. So if you do any one of those, Rabbi Kiva says, so then you are a righteous person. Okay, we're going to go a little further. We're going to go to the Mishnah. The Mishnah can now, okay, so that's basically concludes the first part of the Mishnah. The second part of the Mishnah says, Avra Aveira, if a person does one transgression that includes in it two penalties, we're in the middle of page 81A3. So over Aveira Tanya, we learned Ketzad. What is such a case? What is one transgression that includes in it two death penalties? So Amar Rabbi Yosi, Tanya Ketzad, Amar Rabbi Yosi, Nidim Bezika Rishayna. What does it mean that you get the first one that you're connected to? Zika means the one is like the one that's holding you first. What's an Aveira that you have two death penalties that has one that's holding you first that could be a lesser punishment? So he answers like I brought down, in that case, if you, let's say, marry a young woman and she has a mother who's not married, she's divorced or a widow, or whatever, however the scenario is that she's not married by the time you marry her daughter. Obviously, it could be other ways. But you marry a Baal, if you have relations with your mother-in-law and she's your mother-in-law, and only afterwards she becomes a married woman, she marries after, let's say, obviously a second husband, or remarries her first husband, is nidim b'chamasai, then she obviously gets the burning punishment, which is to be burnt if you sleep with your mother-in-law, because she was first his mother-in-law, because when he married his wife, she was single, the mother-in-law. So technically, he could have married the mother-in-law. But he didn't. He married the daughter. So then when he married the daughter, then his mother-in-law became forbidden to him. Once she remarried or got married, now she's also a married woman. So then clearly you get the punishment of the chamasa of the mother-in-law, which is more severe, which is burning. However, what happens if she was a regular scenario? Your mother-in-law is married, and then you marry her daughter, and then now first she was forbidden to you because she was a married woman, even before you even met the daughter. You don't have to know her. She's by when the second she becomes married to her husband, she's forbidden to everyone, you included. So I mean, the person included, the man included. So first she was a married woman. She was always forbidden to this man. And now when he became her son-in-law, there was an additional. Then we would think, which one? Maybe she still gets the burning, or he still gets the burning. Why? Because he had relations with his mother-in-law. Burning is more severe. And that's what the rabbis say would happen. But Rabbi Yossi says no. She still gets the marriage, she gets the death penalty of choking, which is applied to someone who sleeps with a married woman. Why? Because he was always forbidden to her. That came first. Amalei Reb Ada bar Ava the Ravad. Reb Ada, the son of Ava, says to Rava, in the scenario that she is a mother-in-law first, and then she becomes married, she gets married. Let's also, in such a case, go with the punishment for having a relationship with the married woman. The Amar Rabavo says, Moider Rabbi Yossi agrees, the Isser Moisif, that when there's something added, what's the law of Isser Moisif? So we have to understand, when in the case of a married woman or unmarried woman who has a daughter, and you marry her daughter, so then so in the rest of the world, she's permissible, aside for the people that she has relatives, but for everyone else, anyone else can marry her, right? She's not a married woman, and now she's forbidden to the son-in-law because he's married to her daughter. Now she goes and becomes married. So what happens? So there's a question if you could add on you can add something, but you can only add something if there's something new that happens. But what new happens in this case? That anyone else who's not her son-in-law is now forbidden to have relations with her because she's married she got married. So now anyone else, she's forbidden to every other man. So because there's an additional thing that happens to her, other people, means if he was the only person technically in the world, nothing would have changed, right? Because he was forbidden to her when she was the mother-in-law. Now there's no one else in the world. So nothing changed because she got married. I mean, talking about technically. So if there's two men in the world, right? So in such a case, maybe there would be no addition. But over here, there is an addition. Why? Because there's other people. And so therefore, she gets a new status. She becomes a married woman. And because she becomes a married woman to other people, she's also a married woman it becomes a new title, so to say, of a married woman to him as well. And Rabbi Yossi says that when you add something, we go with the addition. So even though there was nothing added for him, but because she became a married woman, she gets a new title of a married woman. That should affect the son-in-law as well. Let's see the Rashi. Rashi explains. He says like this: something that new happened to this woman. Now she's forbidden to other people who she wasn't forbidden on before. Like in our case. Let's say Rashi says she was a widow. And now she's his mother-in-law, so that's one thing that's wrong. She can't have relations with her son-in-law. Then she was only forbidden to him. Because she's a mother-in-law. Anyone else who's not her family, she was permitted to. She was a single woman. Now that she got married to someone else, now she becomes a married woman that applies to everyone else. So she gets a new title of a married woman. In such a case, Rabbi Yossi would agree that the second transgression now becomes the predominant one, even if it's lesser. Because before she was permitted to everyone else, and now she's forbidden to everyone else. He says because it applies that she becomes a married woman to everyone else. That status of a married woman now applies to her son-in-law. Even though the first initial transgression, the first initial prohibition still stands. So maybe in such a case, they should get a punishable by choking, not by burning. This is the question Rav Ada, the son of Ava, asked to Rava. Now, the Gemara obviously answers that doesn't make sense. That's a foolish question. Why? Because just because she becomes married doesn't mean that now we drop the more severe transgression of a mother-in-law. It just means that she had, like Rashi says, that in case both of them were shoygig, right? The question is there's two questions we have at hand. If you can't add something to a transgression, like let's say, if let's say the law was that your mother-in-law is forbidden to you because she's your mother-in-law. Once that, she's forbidden to you. I mean, what does that mean? Bottom line is, you cannot have relations with this woman because she's your mother-in-law. It doesn't make a difference if you compound other things. It doesn't change anything. She's still not permissible to you. Now that she gets married, nothing's changed. It changed for other men, not for you. She's still forbidden to you. So what would be the question? If we say that ein isra halal isra, you can't add transgressions on things that are forbidden. So in such a case, so we never look at the case of the married woman. As far as the Torah is concerned, as far as you are concerned, your problem with her is that she's your mother-in-law. We're going to make a difference in a shaygig, in a korban. If you have relations with her by mistake, not intentionally, whatever that would be. You don't know that's her, whatever it is, not intentionally. So that you're not going to be tried for death because it wasn't intentional. But you would have to bring a korban, you would have to bring a sacrifice for your transgression that you did by mistake. If there's only one violation that you did, so you only bring one korban. If you did two violations, you have to bring two korbanos, two sacrifices. So in that case, Rabbi Yossi would agree you have to bring two sacrifices because you transgressed two things. But not to say that if you did it intentionally, you should get the lesser of the two. Because this first one still stands, which is that she's your mother-in-law, that's punishable by burning. That's the answer Rav Ada gives to Rav Ada, the son of Ava. So Omer Avo, so Omer is the answer. Omer, we turn the page, 81b1. So he says, Omer le Rav Ada pray. Ada, his son, says, betray katli katlasala. You think we're going to stone him twice? We're not talking about, we can't give two death penalties. So the two death penalties, we stick with the one which is more severe. And like Rashi says, where's the so that if we can't stone the person twice, so what's the point of the law? The point of the law is when it's a shoygi, when it's a mistake. When it's a mistake, if there's two transgressions, there's two obligations for sacrifices. Like let's see the Rashi. Rashi says, betray katla, you think you're going to kill the person twice? Bits me a question mark. Yes, if there's two death penalties, he always goes after the more severe one. Unless, according to Rabbi Yossi, unless the first one she was married first, because then we go with the married because it came first. How could you think we would give him the Eishes Ish, which came later? You want to kill the person a second time? So what does it mean that the Isser Chalal Isser, that we add a transgression? We're talking about if we have to give two sacrifices, that's something differently. But to give when it comes to our Mishnah, which discusses the death penalty, so Rabbi Yossi says that different than the rabbis. The rabbis say we always go with the spear. Even in the case the rabbis would say that she was a married woman and then she became your mother-in-law, you still always go with the mother-in-law, which is a more severe death trumps. The Rabbi Yossi says if she was married first, then she goes with the marriage, which is the choking, because she's a married woman. She was married, she's always forbidden to you. And that's what we look at. The fact that now she's your mother-in-law, that's in the case, let's say, that they didn't warn, there could be scenarios where possibly we find out maybe she wasn't really married, what have you. But she's definitely your mother-in-law, then we go with the mother-in-law. But according to Rabbi Yossi, if she's married, we go with the marriage. And what does it mean that in the second case, where she's your mother-in-law and then she gets married? So and Rabbi Yossi says that Isser Chalal Isser, and we add the severity of her being a married woman. In such a case, it's only applicable in a case where there is a chatas, or in the event they find out that she's not her mother-in-law. Maybe she's not the mother of the child, but she's still a married woman. Okay. I think we're going to stop here, everyone. We're holding the Mishnah on Daf Pei Aleph Amud Beis, and next week we'll try to go further. I think, like Shuki, I know that when we discussed to do Sanhedrin, we were trying to get to the Gadita, which is starting with the next chapter. We're going to finish soon, which we're going to finish in the next few weeks. We'll finish Elon Esrafim and start Chelek, which is the famous Gemara of all those complicated cases that are brought down in the Gemara Chelek. I think we start hitting a Gadita even at the end of this parak as well. All right,
Can
everyone.
I just one thing? Does any of the death penalties apply to the woman?
If she's willing, yes. If she's not willing, not. All the death penalties apply to the woman, depending on the case. There's different cases. Sometimes the woman gets a different death penalty. She's a daughter of a Kohen, what have you. So if she's willing, if she's a willing participant, she also gets the death penalty, yes. Or if she's if she's of age, if she's underage, then that's something else. That's because she's underage. All right, everyone. Laila Tov, take care. And for those who I don't see before Purim, have a happy Purim and then really do a lot of simcha and shalach manas and all the things that come with Purim. It's a long Purim. It starts from Thursday, it ends on Sunday night. Laila Tov, everyone. Take care.
Bye.